All right, let's get into this one. Let's have a good time with it because it should be fun. Kriega bundle up. Welcome to the library, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tennessee Fats, and I'm coming to you from here today because I thought today what we should do is do a bit of a deep dive into a comic that I found. It's a Conan comic, so it's sticking in theme with everything else we talk about here. But this is an odd one because honestly, before physically finding this thing out in the wild, I didn't even know it existed. And this is probably my own darn fault for not collecting Marvel Conan when it was coming out at this particular time. And I gotta tell you, it was only when I really cracked this thing open and started reading through it that I went, ooh, 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 yeah, we gotta talk about this one. So here's the image. Here's the cover of the book that we're covering today. This is king-sized Conan, came out in December of 2020. Now, there's a couple things in here that I think are kind of important that really are taking us to why we need to talk our way through this one. The first thing is, this isn't a fully in-depth story as a one piece. This is an anthology book with a series of small stories that follow through Conan's basically overall Marvel career. Fascinating in that way. And many of these are actually prequels or tie into Marvel adaptations of Robert E. Howard stories, which, as you guys know, we're a big fan of here on this channel. That's pretty cool. The other thing about this is, I actually think this is the first time Roberto de la Torre actually did Conan. I could be wrong on that one, but I think I'm right. All right. Before we get too far into the book, let's talk about how I ended up with this. Because honestly, the meandering path that brought me here when I was in the shop, I felt like a buffoon. All right, let's get into how we actually ended up with this book in the first place. Because I think this is kind of important because this was really a windfall. So we're doing an aside here with the stupid old man rambling story of how I found my way into this $2 book. So here's what happened here. I was at the local comic shop. Now, that's probably a bad way for most stories to start as a comic collector, but that's how this one's starting, okay? So I was at the local comic shop, and I was specifically there because I check in on a regular basis because I've always been looking for issue number 4 of the first King Conan series that encompasses the Hour of the Dragon story. There were 2 series that made up the total story, and I've always been missing one issue, and that's issue number 4. And I gotta tell you, finding it has been a pain in the ass. So I know local comic shops get new inventory from time to time, so I'm checking in. I go wandering in. I said, okay, let's see if we got it. So we started over here in the high-priced Mylar boxes, and because let's look under K, King Conan. No, it's not there. Okay, let's go look under the half-priced Mylar ones. No, it's not there. Go over to the $5 bins. No, it's not there. Okay, so now I'm at the point where I've spent 15 to 20 minutes digging. Now, granted, I'm talking to the guys at the comic shop. I'm having a good time. We're chatting. This isn't a waste of time. And as I'm digging my way through, and I said, go into the $2 bins. Take it. I get to the King Conans. And lo and behold, there are actually King Conans there. But the King Conans that are included there are the old Marvel stuff from way back in the day. And as you guys know, I've already got the first omnibus of that collection. And I did a video review of that, and I'll put that link up over here. But I'm waiting for the second one before I go out and do anything else. I have a good chunk of that run already, but I am not buying it up and finishing the run because I'll just read it in the omnibus format because it's a really cool story. Anyway, we'll do an aside for that later. I'm digging my way through and I'm like, okay, King Conan. And I'm like, ugh. Once again, skunked on the King Conan Dark Horse. Just cannot find the blasted book anywhere. Well, stupidly, actually, as an aside, to this aside, I actually did find that book online. I've ordered it. It's now in the Casa del Fats. I would say that's a win. But as I'm digging through, I'm digging. I was like, what? And that's when I pulled out this, which is what we're going to be talking about today. There was a king-sized Conan. Now, I've never seen this book before in my life. I actually didn't even know it existed, to tell you the honest truth, until I actually found it in physical format sitting in front of me. And I'm digging. I was like, oh, King Conan. That's a king-sized Conan. What is this all about? And I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at the vintage, and it says the 50th year anniversary type publishing that Marvel was doing. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm cool with that. I'm like, I get what we're doing here. And as I'm trying to figure out, but what is it? Because I'm looking at this thinking it's somewhere around the vintage of, remember that Conan 2099 book that we did? Again, I did a review of that. I'll put a link up for that over there. That, I'm thinking, okay, it's got to be something like that. And I was like, well, it's $2. Really? Can you lose on $2? I'm like, well, I don't think you can. Well, in these particular $2 bins, there's no boards. It's just in a bag. So I'm like, all right, so here's one. I'm like, all right, well, the corners are destroyed. Let's maybe. Well, I'm digging. There's like 8 copies of this thing. I don't think this sold all that well when it went out, because these are looking to me like store inventory, like these never left the shop in the first place, and now they're in the $2 bin. So I dug my way through, found this one. I was like, okay, all right. Got the thing home and said, all right, well, you know what, let's just put it on the shelf. And honestly, I ignored it. Didn't think much of it until I'm actually putting it in a bag at a board and I'm thumbing through it. And I'm thinking, wait, what? And I said, okay, well, we got to read this now. And that's what brings us to this video. All right, so that's how I ended up with this. And again, to you guys, it might not seem like that much of an odd thing, but as a Conanophile, honestly, I was standing in the shop feeling like a complete moron because I'm thinking, well, hold on, I'm huge into Conan comics. This is pretty much all I read. Well, except for some other things. How is it I didn't know about this? So anyways, it was a moment. It was a self-reflective moment for me. But let's talk about that comment I made earlier about Roberto de la Torre. Now, Roberto de la Torre, for those of you who don't know, is really making waves with Titan Comics right now, with the new series of Conan the Barbarian. Now, we've done some reviews for the Titan books, and I'll put up the link to the, you know what, I'll do the link to the first story arc that we covered up over here. Because Titan is doing a fantastic job with this. Jim Zub is working with Roberto de la Torre. They made that first arc. They made the third arc, which has now wrapped up. I haven't got my last issue of it yet, so nobody spoil it for me. When I get it, we'll talk our way through that arc when we get there. But he's done a fantastic job of really channeling his inner Conanophile to draw some just stupendous work. So this book kind of made me go, huh, because as I was following my way through it, I got to one of the stories. And we'll talk about the stories individually here when we get to that next chapter of the video, but one of these is done by Roberto de la Torre. And it made me step back and go, hold on. This isn't really Marvel work. Now, I know he worked with Jim Zub in the past, but is this it? Is this the first? And so I did some digging. And it took me a while. Now, you guys can tippity-tippity down below if I'm wrong on this one. Let me know. But I suspect, and I posit to you today, that this is, in fact, the first time that Roberto de la Torre actually did art on Conan the Barbarian, at least in print mass media. Maybe he's done it on his own, but this is what I'm thinking the first one is. Now, I know there is Conan number 25 of the second series of Conan the Barbarian that Marvel put out. But that issue didn't come out until September of 2021. And in that, there's a beautiful prose piece. Well, it's not really prose. It's a beautiful piece that's a lot of inner dialogue with a Devourer of Souls and an aged King Conan, which all turns out to be a dream sequence, by the way. And in that, that's all done with Roberto de la Torre. And I think that's really, really well done. But this predates that because this goes back to December of 2020. I think this is actually it. There's my position on that one. Okay, so we've covered the Roberto de la Torre thing. What else is important in this book? Well, there's 5 stories in this. Five stories in this one that I think are fairly critical. And they're each a piece that are a different timeline in Conan's life. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through this. I'm going to show you guys who worked on which story, what story that ties to from Robert E. Howard or from the Conan the Barbarian comics. And then we'll talk to some of the important points in each story, but I'm not going to spoil the stories because many of you are going to want to go out and buy this. This is actually a really cool thing. But I'll just show you some of the highlights. Then we'll come back and wrap this one up. So let's start with story number 1. Story number 1 is early in Conan's life. Let's get into that one. All right, let's get into story arc number 1 here. Now, story arc number 1 in this one is titled, well, it's not really titled. You know what? I'm not going to give away the titles. There are themes that are covered in the table of contents page of this book. I'm not going to spoil them. This one's theme is the Barbarian. This is a very early story in Conan's life. And this is kind of interesting. And forgive the fan in the background, by the way. That reflection is because it was getting way too hot in here in the library in the Casa del Fats. And quite frankly put, we have workplace safety rules here. And quite frankly put, I'm concerned about the safety of this environment. Never mind that now. Listen, the bottom line is, this is a Barbarian story. It's written by Roy Thomas, and the arting is done by Steve McNiven. Now, this is an interesting one because this story is a very early chronological story for Conan the character. And in this, it takes place after the sack of the siege on Venarium, which, as we know, is the first time Conan goes out and actually really just barbarians his way through a battle. Granted, he's been in a variety of minor skirmishes as a child, but this is where Conan, at the age of 15, has gone off and done this, and then meanders and starts his travels throughout the Hyborian Age. Happens after that, but this is directly leading into the beginning of The Frost Giant's Daughter, or The Gods of the North story, which is by Robert E. Howard, which is a really good one, wherein Conan is working for the Aesir as a mercenary. And this story actually takes place literally as Venarium's still burning, There's a bunch of inner dialogue. There's some interesting points that are brought up in this one. I'm going to show you the splash page over here, just to give you a sense of what the art looks like. And in here you have Conan go through some reflection and discussion with some other Cimmerians as they're heading back home. And Conan's like, no, I don't think I will. I'm going to go that way. And at the end of this, he ends up actually running into Olaf, who is the leader of the Aesir war party that he ends up working for with the Frost Giant's daughter, or Gods of the North, however you want to title that particular story. Some interesting things that came out of this one. One, you know that horn that he wears, that horn helmet with the pointy, that thing's? It's funny because apparently those Cimmerians, based on the writing in here, thought it was somewhat farcical as well. In fact, the interesting comment that comes in here is the Cimmerians are kind of making fun of him about this very helmet, and we find out the helmet actually belongs to Connacht. Connacht being his grandfather, who was part of a southern Cimmerian tribe, went and traveled throughout the south, was a mercenary, and really being the inspiration for where Conan got his wanderlust, and then came back and settled in the tribes of northern Cimmeria, where, quite frankly, he had a family and children, and that led to Conan. Interesting thing on that one. Now, the other thing that came out of this that was kind of interesting is, you know the ridiculous 3 bauble things that Conan always has in the early Barry Windsor Smith art? There's generally 3 of them, and they have weird swirly things on them. Some of them are red, and they're gold, and big chain, all that sort of stuff. We find out that the Cimmerians are actually giving him grief about this, because I guess these belong to somebody named Rion, R-I-O-N. And Rion, the reason why Conan wears these is because Conan viewed Rion, who has now passed on, as somewhat of an older brother. And that's why he wears these baubles. And it's fascinating that even the Cimmerians are like, well, why are you wearing that? It was like, well, because, you know, he was like an older brother to me, and that's why I've done this. And it's interesting, if you really want to dig down into the story, the questions that are coming from his fellow Cimmerians kind of in a way show the difference of young Conan and the way he's thinking to the way the Cimmerians think that are around him. This is a wonderful piece of Roy Thomas lore that he's written in here and he's created, which is fascinating because you've got a tie back in here to Connacht. You've got a tie back in here to Conan having basically big brother type emotions to a fallen comrade who I believe we're supposed to take in as died in the siege of Venarium, if I'm reading between the lines correctly. But you also have this fact that there's almost a split very much fundamentally in the way Conan thinks and the Cimmerians think, which might be what leads to him just saying, no, I'm just gonna go over there. You guys have fun heading back to Cimmeria. I'm gonna... Interesting in those little twists that came out in this one. I thought those were kind of some key points in here that made me, huh. I'll show you the end panel here that comes out at the end of that story where he runs into or where he meets up with Olaf. Other things happen in the middle. I'm not spoiling it. But you know it's going to lead to the Gods of the North, well, the Frost Giant's daughter. So really, if you know Robert E. Howard, I've already thrown that out in the very beginning of this segment. That's story number 1. Very interesting early story. Roy Thomas writing on it, which we know on this channel is a good thing. And you've got all these little snippets. Quite cool. Let's get into story number 2. Let's get into story number 2. Now, story number 2, the theme on this one is the thief. Now, we know Conan enjoys his thieving. This is a thing. Well, he doesn't, well, I don't know. When you read into this, I, as a person who reads Conan, gets the impression he actually gets a little bit of a kick out of the thievery side of this thing. And I think he actually enjoys it and thinks it's fun. Maybe it's part of his upbringing that he just looks at it and says, yeah, this is just something we do. And I only steal from people who deserve to be stolen from, like a Robin Hood sort of thing. Either way, I think he enjoys this. Again, a younger phase in Conan's career. He's still early in his travels. The story takes place in Aranjan, which is in southern Zamora, which, as we know, and here's the hint. I just said it's Aranjan in southern Zamora. You Robert E. Howard fans out there know this is going to, in theory, be leading into the Tower of the Elephant. This actually is a prequel story to that. Fascinating story on this one. This one's written by Kurt Busiek, and it has art by Pete Woods. Now, I'm going to aside here for a second. Let's talk about Kurt Busiek for a second, shall we? Kurt Busiek is a freaking genius. I'm going to say that right now, and I'm going to stand behind that statement. The man writes like a maniac, and he world builds like a maniac. Now, this was a good story, don't get me wrong, okay? And I've read other Kurt Busiek stuff as well. But if any of you out there say to yourself, Tennessee Fats, what's the greatest Kurt Busiek sort of contribution to comics that I should really be diving into? I'll tell you what it is. Astro City. Now, I know that doesn't really fit in with our whole Conan and Robert E. Howard shtick that we do on this channel, but the Astro City books, I'll tell you, I've got the hardcovers and trade paperbacks over there on the shelf over there in the library. You can't see them. I have kept those since I first bought them. I love those things. I think they are some of the greatest world-building exercises in comic format in a short period of time that I've ever seen. So if any of you are interested in diving down that rabbit hole of Kurt Busiek's sort of non-Conan, you know, more of a superhero-esque type thing, feel free. Astro City, dive into it. You can get electronic copies of that and read that crap for free. Go for it. Enjoy it. Love it. Come back down below how much you love it. Or down below saying, Tennessee fans, you're an idiot. I really did not enjoy those. Stop leading me down the garden path. There's my Kurt Busiek aside for you. Okay. Back to this one. The Thief. This is a really cool story. And I'll tell you, there's a couple of really cool aspects to it. Here, I'm going to show you the splash page right now. Okay? Splash page is right there. And I know I told you I wasn't going to tell you the titles of the stories. Well, this one's going to kind of show you the title of it. Doesn't matter. Listen, the bottom line here is, just look at that. That is such a beautiful depiction of the Elder Gods. And it really sets the theme, because you jump into this, you're on page 1, and you see this like giant, like screaming in your face Elder God type things. Like, for those of you who have read enough Doctor Strange comics in Marvel, you're looking at some of these shapes and outlines going, I think I know who that is. And one of them actually makes a fairly prominent appearance in the Savage Avengers story, which came out shortly after this. Not going to say who. Anybody who wants to see my Savage Avengers review, over there. All right, so here's the deal. It's a pretty cool story, and here's the shtick in it. Conan effectively in this is sitting around listening to the wise men of Erengen as they're debating on theology and the Elder Gods and magic. And I'm not going to spoil it for you. What happens is there's a variety of things that occur. There's some violence. And here's the interesting twist into the character development of Conan. Two, I'll call them younger mages, approach a young Conan and say, hey, you can hold your shtick. How would you like to get a shticky security job here? Basically just covering our butts, because we're going to try to summon a demon. And we want somebody with a sword standing nearby, just in case things go wrong. And Conan's like, there is no effing way in hell I am even considering that. You're nuts. Get the hell away from me before I stab you. Like, his reaction to that is somewhat farcical. He jokes at it. But it's a very vehement, no, this is not happening. A very young Conan very early on with the, I really don't like magic and you guys are going to F around with demons. You guys are nuts. Like, only crazy people would mess around with demons. I don't want anything to do with you. Very cool in that aspect. At the end of the day here, we actually have Conan engaging in some thievery. I'm not going to tell you how, I'm not going to tell you why, but it's actually quite clever how he gets there. I actually like that part. And you have it leading off with him again in Erengen at the end of the story, being completely safe. He's got a sack full of gold. He's quite happy with himself. And in the background, what do you see? Image over here, the Tower of the Elephant, clearly leading into that. And it's actually even in the dialogue saying, you know, I wonder what will happen next. Fascinating and really an interesting one. And again, it gives you more of a picture of what's happening prior to the Tower of the Elephant. In the Tower of the Elephant, there's clearly reference to the fact that he's been there for a while and he's been listening to the wise men and they're making his head shake because he can't grasp what these idiots are talking about. You actually get out of that this story. This story just actually feeds directly into that. Quite well done. I really enjoyed number 2 here. Number 2 was a fun one. Okay, number 3. Okay, story number 3. Now, this one is the mercenary story. Now, the first 2 were really, really good. Okay, that's a fact. I'm just gonna throw that down here and leave it on the table, and you guys can just, you know, absorb that when you go get your own copy of the book. Number 3 was a fun one. Now, number 3 is the one where we suddenly turn the page and we see this. That's right. This is where we jump into the Roberto de la Torre work, and we're going, whoa. Now, this is written by Chris Claremont. Now, aside, how many of us know Chris Claremont? Put up your hands. But I imagine the majority of you, if you read comics, do. This guy is, well, really good. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna hack him. He's done a good job. He's done a good job with a lot of titles. I know a lot of people out there in some ways kind of detest what he did with certain titles when he was at Marvel. And okay, I can see that. There's very much a large world of interplay of the characters, a lot of work that he puts on with, you know, how characters deal with one another and the world around them. I actually really enjoy that. Again, shift the hat. It comes back to that whole world building thing. I've always found his ability to do it also quite good, which is funny because you have writers here that are really good at world building back to back. I'm wondering if Marvel actually thought that way when they were putting this together. Anyways, Chris Claremont did it, Roberto de la Torre, The Mercenary. This story takes place a little older in Conan's life, and we're seeing this, we're moving forward here in Conan's overall career. He's now working as a mercenary under King, and I'm going to massacre this name, Yezdegred, the King of Torre, okay? And this is the guy that, well, quite frankly tries to kill Conan later when he's a king. Was that in a comic adaptation, or was that a Robert E. Howard story? I think, that was just a comic adaptation. Maybe? Anyway, he's somebody who's trying on the opposite side of the fence with Conan a fair amount. And in the comics, he's somebody that Conan actually works for sometimes. Now, I actually had to... All right. I had to take a minute on this one, a hot minute, and say to myself, when? I have a very hard time figuring out when. Because I read the first two of these stories, and I was like, okay, this clearly leads into, as I said, story number 1, Gods of the North. Story number 2, Tower of the Elephant. I get it. This one, Conan's a mercenary. He's out in, north of Hyrcania. He's fighting off people that live in the steppes, who I believe later he actually becomes the leader of as the Kozakai. This is a difficult one for me because I'm trying to figure out where this fits in the Robert E. Howard story, and I can't place it. And it's funny because as near as I can figure, this is one of two places. And you guys, if you read this story and you can place it better for me down below, I'm more than happy to hear your thoughts on this one because honestly, I need it. This is either something that's taking place in some weird way before the comic adaptation of Hour of the Vulture, which is it's the story that morphed Sonia Rigatano, if I'm saying that correctly, into Red Sonja in comic format, which isn't really a Conan story, but it's somewhere with that comic morphing of that. Could be. I don't know. Just based on the geography. Or it's somewhere prior to Red Nails. And if you've read Red Nails, you might know where I'm going with that one. But I wanted to throw that out there as another alternative as to where this is, because at the beginning of Red Nails, Valeria and Conan have abandoned a mercenary troop and run off and head south. But I don't think geographically they were in the same area as where this story is taking place. So I think that one's much less likely. I think it's closer to that whole Hour of the Vulture thing. Tough one. I couldn't place this one. Anyways, I'm not going to go too far into this one. I mean, I gave you the splash page on this one. Effectively, this story is very much an older Conan. It's an introspective one. Conan in this one is in a battle. He's forced to murder when he's in a battle. It's fine, you're in a battle. I get it, you're a mercenary. You're getting paid to kill people. At least that's what Conan is being paid to do. And in this, he runs into a dying, I guess, teen. And the teen has arrows sticking out of them. Their time on this earth is running out. And there is a dialogue. This is not a fighting story, although there is some fantastic fighting sequences at the front. This is a talking story, wherein Conan is comforting and having a chat with this teen who's just watched their mother get killed in battle and now knows that they're dying. And Conan's like, you'd only have a couple minutes left here, kid. You probably don't want to spend it being bitter about this king and saying, I'm going to kill the king. Like, that time is gone. Like, that's not happening here. You need to spend time just being at peace with who you are before you go. And that I thought was pretty interesting. Much more of an introspective story. Much more of one where Conan's really looking in and talking to himself. At the same time, he's talking through the vehicle that is this dying warrior teen. Interesting story. Again, where it fits in, I'm still struggling with that one. If you guys pick it up and you have ideas where it should go, just down below, just go ahead and put that down there. That's story number 3. I'm not going to go too far into that one. I'm going to leave that one as it is because it is a much more introspective story. And if I give too much out there, well, I've just ruined it. And we don't want to do that here. Okay, story number 4. Let's get into that one. All right, let's get into story number 4 here. Story number 4 is themed The Avenger. Now, that's not the Avengers. What do they call it? The Avengers Protocol? Is that what they called it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? The Avengers Protocol, the Avengers? I don't know, something like that. This hat. Okay, anyways, the bottom line is this is called The Avenger. Now, I can see why this is called The Avenger. Let me put up the splash page over here. Okay, this is where this story starts off with. Now, this whole thing is written and drawn by Kevin Eastman. Now, here's the weird thing about this one. I don't understand how this story fits in this actual anthology book. I don't. Like, we go through story number 1, number 2, very clear tie-ins to Robert E. Howard stories. Story number 3, it's arguable as to where that fits into a Robert E. Howard story, or whether that just fits into a Marvel adaptation of a Robert E. Howard story. And you get this one. which seems to be this lost point in Conan's space. I'm calling it that because I really cannot grasp from this story where this fits in Conan's life. I don't know. Like, I'm thinking it's probably somewhere. No, I don't even want to say it. Because I could be way off. I'm thinking you're talking some sort of Pictish border raids type point in Conan's life on this one. But again, I could be entirely wrong. So here's the shtick on this one. Effectively, this story is an odd one. It's basically Conan is injured while he's in a battle with a small war party. A village finds him. They nurse him back to health. He offers to pay them. They say no. They give him food. He goes wandering off. Comes back trying to give them food in return to find they've all been massacred by the very, I guess, warlord party that was the one that injured him in the first place. And then he goes out and kills all of them, basically to avenge this village that's been wiped out. It's a weird one. I don't get this. And it's funny because the art throws this one off for me. Now, the art on this one, I'll show that splash page again. And it's interesting because I look at that, and the first thing I see when I see this is, and I'm going back to Conan, the Return of Storm, I don't know, Storm. That mini-series that we did a review of, I'll put a link up over there. That, to me, is what this jumped out at. But then I thought about it after the fact. I thought, no. And this is where I'm having a hard time on this one. Because this art style and this story style seems very similar to a story of Conan, which is Conan's grandfather. I remember reading this, and I am convinced, and this is again my stupid old man brain, and you guys can type below and let me know if I'm wrong. There was a story back in Savage Sword that was done in this art style. That was a story of Conan heading south. And if I remember correctly, he witnesses a ritual sacrifice where somebody is killed and turned into what we would now what we would now commonly call a bog body or a peat body. For bog bodies, if you want to know, if you have not run into that term before, tickety in the Google and you'll find it. Anyways, Conan runs into this. He kind of gets his fill of Southern societies, and it's a very introspective story, but it's done in the same art style as this. But when I go online and I type in Kevin Eastman and I'm trying to find it, I cannot find it at all. I even went online and I was trying to find, okay, Conan, comic, like all these key terms I'm throwing in, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'm sure it was a Savage Sword. I can't picture them of putting that in a Marvel Conan the Barbarian story. Now, I know Dark Horse did some stories of Conan as well, but that's not this. I'm positive that's not what I'm thinking about here. But again, it's just the art style between these two that makes me think they're similar. This is very much a hack and slash story, which is just, okay, well, you know, I was hurt, I did this, that happened, and I don't mind going through the actual chronological events because at the end of the day, we know Conan survives. Really, at the end of the day, we know he wins. Can't help you on that one. That's story number 4. This is an odd one for me. This one just sort of stuck out and I went, I was kind of scratching my head when I was done this one. But then we come back to story number 5. Now, story number 5. All right, story number 5. Let's get into that. All right, it's time to get into story number 5. Now, I got to tell you, there's a reason I think why they stuck this one at the back of the book. Now, okay, I thought number 1 and number 2 in this book were bangers. But I got to tell you, this thing, this just wins it 6 ways to Sunday for me. Okay, so here's the story. So this one is written by Stephen DeKnight. Now, I'm going to say the artist's name horrendously. I'm sure I'm going to just massacre this. So, Jesus, if you're watching this and you want to correct me, feel free to comment down below. So the artist's name is Jesus Sade, and I'm sure I'm saying that last name wrong, but you know what? I'm going to go with it. Anyways, here's the splash page on this one. So this is a story that actually doesn't lead into Queen of the Black Coast. This is kind of one of those interludes within Queen of the Black Coast. Now, you guys know, if you've watched this channel enough, you know Queen of the Black Coast is my absolute favorite Robert E. Howard Conan story ever. This thing wins 100% of the time. So anytime I see something that's got Queen of the Black Coast, even a tie into it, I'm like, okay, what do you got? Like, I am immediately invested. Now, the art on this is kind of interesting. It's almost very, I wouldn't say AI, that's the wrong term. It's very, to me, computer graphic design sort of thing. It seems to me that this is very much done in a way that this is all done digitally, which is fine. I have no issue with digital art. I think this is really neat. And the art in this does a really good job of telling a story. Now, you got to watch for the story, though. There's an overall surface story in this one wherein Conan and Belit and the rest of the crew, the rest of the crew find this floating heap of a monstrous ship, which is haunted all to heck. And effectively the thing is being owned and run by a demon that can see forward and backwards in time, talks to Conan. And it's kind of funny because the demon's been doing this for so long, he doesn't know where in the timeline he actually is at that point in time. See, I did that. That's kind of funny. Anyways, he doesn't know where he is. And he's saying to himself, oh, sorry, is this where we are on the stream? Oh, yeah, no, not king yet. Yeah, forget that whole thing, because he's talking to Conan. Because he knows, this is an interesting aspect of this demon knows that Conan will be the end of him. And he's been waiting for this time memorial for forever for this to happen, because he knows it's coming. And at the end of it, I'm not going to spoil how this happens here, but he says, okay, Conan, I'm going to give you a little bit of a gift here. And just drops on him just before he goes. And it's fascinating because this little gift is an absolute freaking nightmare. Now, I'm not going to tell you why, I'm not going to tell you how, but I'm going to tell you, it adds a whole other layer to Queen of the Black Coast and to the ramifications after Queen of the Black Coast ends that, quite frankly put, I don't know how the hell Conan would have recovered from that. That is just mind, like several times, like literally, like this is one of those things where it didn't just rip my heart out. It ripped my heart out, threw it on the floor, stepped on it a couple times, picked it up, put it back in, sewed it up, then cut it out from behind to pull it out through a shoulder blade, then threw it on the ground and stomped on it in a stiletto. That's some serious heart-wrenching material, and this thing just nailed it. Wow. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. So let's take a look at the image of this cover one more time, shall we? I'll stick it up over here. So King Conan #1, December of 2020. Has 5 stories within it, has a cool little Nemedian Chronicle thing at the front. It's got a nice map in the back that's got all the red blotches where this thing chronologically takes place in the Hyborian Age and where the actual events are occurring. And I like that too, that's kind of cool. And in this, you have some really good stories. I've already walked through each of the stories, and I think stories 1, 2, 3, and 5 just scream out of this one and say, if you're a Robert E. Howard fan or a Conan fan, you want to own this book. Story number 4 was kind of a miss for me. It wasn't a miss in that I was saying it's a terrible story. It's a good story. But I don't see how it fits in the anthology. All the other stories to me clearly say this happens at this point in time in Robert E. Howard's timeline, it happens at this point in time in Robert E. Howard's timeline, or it happens here. But this one, I'm having a hard time with it. Now, it's great because to me, that's triggered my memory of that other Conan story that I remember reading that now I'm probably going to have to go find because I'm not going to be able to rest until I actually can put that to bed in my own head because I have stupid old man OCD. But other than that, this is a really cool book. Do I think you guys should buy this? Well, here's my thing. If you like the Robert E. Howard adaptations and you like this piece that's going through, I would say yes. Because honestly, story number 1 really does add a lot to the beginning of Tower of the Elephant. Story number 5 adds a whole other dimension to the Queen of the Black Coast. Story number 1, it does a really good job leading into that whole thing with the Frost Giant's daughter, and it delves a little bit more into the immediate after impact of the Siege of Venarium. That's kind of cool. And I would argue that all of these things, if you're interested in the psychological profile of Conan, really do a good job of building the character. So, can you find this thing for a couple bucks? I certainly hope you can. I really do, because honestly, if you can go back and buy Todd McFarlane's first work on Spider-Man in $1 bin or a $2 bin, don't you think you would want that? And I'm not saying that Roberto de la Torre is going to be the next Todd McFarlane, but I gotta tell you, he darn well should be, because honestly, the stuff I'm seeing coming out of Titan right now that he's working on, mind-blowing. Well, everybody, that's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed this one. We'll be coming back with some more Conan next week. Until next time, have a great day.